At my sister's wedding, she took credit for the company I built, while my parents applauded. I didn't correct her, because the investor in the room already knew the truth. The ballroom smelled like cut flowers and polished wood, the kind of neutral luxury meant to offend no one. Light spilled from the chandeliers in careful symmetry, settling on linen-covered tables and the soft shoulders of strangers dressed as family. I arrived late enough to avoid greetings, early enough to take my seat before the music swelled again. My place card was not where I expected it. I stood for a moment with the folded card between my fingers, reading my name, David Thomas, printed neatly in black. The table number pointed me toward the back, near the service door. A narrow aisle separated me from the catering station, where waiters moved with efficient silence. Steam lifted occasionally from covered trays. The noise there was different, functional. I took the chair offered by the arrangement and smoothed my jacket, noticing how the chair wobbled slightly on the carpet. At the front, my sister was already glowing. She stood near the bride and groom, laughing easily, one hand resting on the microphone stand, as if it belonged to her. The photographer hovered, waiting for moments to capture. Our parents sat in the front row. My mother's hands folded around a clutch she had chosen carefully. My father's posture straight and approving. They had arrived early, taken photos, greeted donors and distant relatives. They did not look toward the back. The wedding had been my sister's idea of timing. She had chosen this moment because everyone would be present, because the room would be warm with goodwill, because applause would be easy to borrow. She understood rooms. She always had. I had helped pay for the open bar. The ceremony ended. Plates arrived. Silverware chimed lightly. I ate slowly, more aware of the rhythm than the taste. Every so often, someone passed behind me and apologized softly. I nodded without looking up. From my angle, the head table was a distant island, bright and important. When the toasts began, the room settled into attentive silence. Glasses were raised. My sister stepped forward when her name was announced. She adjusted the microphone, glanced once toward our parents, then smiled at the crowd. She spoke confidently, with practiced pauses. She congratulated the couple. She told a short story about childhood summers. She made the right people laugh. Then she shifted, casually, as if the thought had just occurred to her. And of course, she said, I wouldn't be standing here today without the business I built from nothing. The word built landed with a soft thud. She continued, describing late nights, risk, vision. She mentioned investors, partnerships, expansion. She said my company with ease. Heads nodded. A few people turned, curious, searching the room for the person she had become. I felt the small movement before the sound reached me, the ripple of attention passing across the tables. Someone near me whispered her name. Another murmured approval. Applause followed her sentences like punctuation. She lifted her glass higher. To hard work, she said, and to believing in yourself, even when no one else does. The applause was generous. I did not look at my parents right away. I focused instead on the edge of my plate, the thin line of sauce that had cooled into a darker shade. When I did glance forward, my mother was smiling, her eyes bright. My father clapped once more than necessary, a habit of his when he wanted to be seen agreeing. Neither of them looked back. There was a small, precise moment when I understood what had happened. It wasn't anger. It was recognition. The story she was telling had been rehearsed. The credit had been reassigned carefully, without drama. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a choice. I remembered the early mornings when I signed documents before dawn so she could sleep. The afternoons spent explaining contracts she never read. The dinners I skipped because suppliers were waiting. Those memories did not rush at me. They arrived one by one, orderly, like items on a list. The toast ended. Glasses clinked. The band began again. A man at my table leaned toward me, friendly and unaware. Your sister's impressive, he said. I nodded. She is. He smiled, satisfied with the exchange, and turned back to his date. The speeches continued. The groom's father spoke. The maid of honor cried briefly, then laughed at herself. Between courses, I stood to stretch my legs. No one stopped me. I walked toward the edge of the room where the light dimmed and the music softened. From there, I could see the entire arrangement clearly. My sister moved easily from group to group, accepting compliments, placing her hand on sleeves, touching wrists briefly. Our parents followed her path at a respectful distance, proud and quiet. The investors sat together near the front, faces neutral, attentive. I recognized one of them immediately, though we had never met in person. He had a habit of listening with his chin lowered, eyes steady. I stayed where I was. When dessert arrived, I did not return to my seat. I watched a waiter replace the empty chair with another from a nearby table, tightening the arrangement. My absence made the room more efficient. I appreciated the honesty of that. My phone vibrated once in my pocket. I did not check it. Instead, I took a slow breath and felt the weight of the evening settle. The humiliation was not loud. It was clean. It fit neatly into the program, timed between laughter and music. No one would remember it as a scene. They would remember it as a story told well. I stepped out into the corridor where the air was cooler and the carpet darker. The sound of the band faded behind me, replaced by the low hum of the building. I paused near a window that overlooked the parking lot, rows of cars reflecting light like still water. Through the glass, I saw the investor leave his table and stand. He did not raise a glass. He did not smile. He spoke quietly to the planner, then waited. I did not know then what he would say, but I understood something else. Something simple and steady. The story being told inside the room was incomplete. And incompleteness, I had learned, had a way of correcting itself slowly. And in public, when the time was right, I adjusted my jacket, checked my watch, and waited. By the time I reached home, the music was probably still playing. I placed my keys on the counter, aligned them carefully beside my phone, and loosened my tie without removing it. The apartment felt larger at night, emptied of voices and expectation. I left the lights off and sat by the window, watching the city move in small, indifferent patterns. The first message arrived before midnight. It was from my mother. "Why did you leave so early?" People noticed. I read it once, then again, and set the phone face down. The phrasing mattered more than the question. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Did something happen?" Just observation. Optics. A second message followed, this time from my father. "Your sister worked very hard on that speech. Tonight wasn't about you." I didn't respond. I poured a glass of water and drank it slowly, noticing how my hand remained steady. Silence, I had learned, was often interpreted as guilt. I let them interpret what they needed. By morning, the tone had shifted. My sister called first. I watched the phone vibrate across the countertop, her name lighting up the screen. I let it ring until it stopped, then listened to the voicemail later, when the urgency had softened. Her voice was light, almost amused. "You disappeared," she said. "People were asking where you went. Don't make this a thing, David. It was just a toast, just a toast, just a toast." The next call came from an aunt, then a cousin. Concern wrapped in curiosity. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Vague reassurance, gentle correction. I had misunderstood. I was being sensitive. Family events were emotional. I listened. I thanked them for checking in. I said very little. What none of them asked was why the story sounded different from the one they had known for years. The pressure wasn't loud. It arrived in small, consistent taps. Messages about unity, about letting things go, about not embarrassing the family by creating confusion. My mother suggested lunch. My father suggested we talk man to man. My sister suggested we forget the whole thing and focus on the future. I declined politely. During the quiet hours between calls, I returned to work. Not the visible work, the kind that earned applause, but the quiet maintenance that had always belonged to me. I reviewed files stored in folders labeled with dates instead of names. I checked signatures. I reread agreements I had drafted long before anyone thought they would matter. The business had started in my apartment, at the same table where my keys now rested. My sister had the idea. She had the energy, the confidence, the ability to sell a vision before it existed. What she didn't have was patience for structure. I provided that. I registered the company under a holding structure that allowed flexibility. I negotiated supplier contracts when cash flow was uncertain. I signed personal guarantees when banks hesitated. When my sister wanted to move fast, I made sure the ground wouldn't collapse under her. At the time, it felt natural. We were family. She trusted me with details she didn't want to understand. I trusted her to handle the spotlight. The documents reflected that trust. Every major agreement listed me not as an employee, but as managing director of operations. Silent, functional, necessary. The shares were divided unevenly on paper. But control was not measured in percentages alone. Certain clauses required my signature to execute. Others reverted authority in the event of reputational instability. I hadn't written that clause with my sister in mind. I had written it for investors. 3 days after the wedding, an email arrived from a number I didn't recognize. The subject line was brief. Clarification. The message was even briefer. "We should talk." I knew who it was. We scheduled a meeting for the following week, at the firm's office downtown. I did not tell my family. There was nothing to tell yet. In the meantime, the isolation sharpened. My sister stopped calling and started posting. Photos from the wedding appeared online, captions celebrating love, success, momentum. Comments poured in. She responded to each with warmth and gratitude. Our parents shared the posts, adding heart emojis and proud statements about family legacy. I was not tagged. A group chat I had been part of for years went quiet. When I checked later, I saw that I had been removed. No announcement, no explanation, just absence. It was efficient. I took a walk that evening, moving through familiar streets with new awareness. The city didn't care who received credit. Buildings stood because someone had done the work correctly, not because their name was known. That thought steadied me. At home, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in months and removed a slim folder. Inside were printed copies of agreements, notarized forms, and a single handwritten note from my sister, dated years earlier. "I don't understand this stuff," she had written. "I trust you. Just make it work." I placed the note back where it belonged. The meeting came quickly. The investor's office was quiet, designed to minimize distraction. He greeted me with a nod, not a smile. We sat across from each other at a polished table. No assistants hovered. No one rushed us. "I watched the wedding video," he said calmly. "Interesting speech." I waited. He folded his hands. "I've invested in enough companies to recognize when the story and the structure don't match." I slid a folder across the table. He didn't open it immediately. He looked at me instead, measuring something unspoken. "You didn't correct her," he said. "No," I replied. "Why?" "Because timing matters." He considered that, then opened the folder. The conversation that followed was precise. He asked about clauses. I answered. He asked about authority. I clarified. He asked about intent. I told the truth, without embellishment. When it was over, he closed the folder carefully. "There's a shareholders gathering next week," he said. "Public structured." I nodded. As I stood to leave, my phone vibrated again. This time, it was my father. "We need to talk. Your sister is upset. This has gone far enough." I read the message and placed the phone back in my pocket. On the elevator ride down, I felt the weight shift, not lift, not vanish, just move. The story was still being told without me, but it had reached a point where accuracy would matter more than volume. I stepped out into the street and walked toward the light, knowing that the next time we would all be in the same room, silence would no longer be enough to maintain the illusion. And I was ready for that. The shareholders' gathering was held in a glass conference hall overlooking the river, a space designed to suggest transparency even when conversations were carefully controlled. The invitation arrived formally, addressed to me by full name and title. I accepted without comment. I arrived early. The room was already arranged, long table, identical chairs, water placed at precise intervals. Screens displayed the company logo in muted tones. I took a seat near the center, not at the head, not at the edge. From there, I could see the door clearly. My sister entered 10 minutes later. She was confident, dressed for visibility, her posture practiced. She scanned the room, registering faces, assessing reactions. When she saw me, there was a brief pause, no surprise, just calculation. She recovered quickly and took a seat across the table, close enough to suggest parity. Our parents arrived last, together. They looked uncomfortable, as if the formality of the setting had disrupted the usual hierarchy. My mother avoided my eyes. My father nodded once, curtly. The investors filled in around us. Quiet greetings. Minimal small talk. When everyone was seated, the man from the wedding, the one who had watched more than he spoke, stood. He did not raise his voice. "Before we begin," he said, "there's a matter of clarification." No one interrupted him. Authority has a way of simplifying rooms. He gestured toward the screen, and the logo was replaced by a timeline. Dates appeared. Milestones. Contracts. The structure of the company, laid out without commentary. "This is not about credit," he continued. "It's about accuracy." My sister shifted slightly. I noticed her hand tightened around her pen. He pointed to the first agreement. "Operational authority," he said. "Held here." My name appeared beneath the heading. There was a small sound, then a chair adjusting. A breath caught. My mother leaned forward, squinting at the screen as if clarity might change the meaning. The investor moved on. "Financial guarantees," he said. "Signed personally." Again, my name. He did not look at me. He didn't need to. "This clause," he continued, "grants execution power in the event of reputational risk, triggered by public misrepresentation." The room was very quiet now. My sister spoke. Finally. Her voice was controlled, but thinner than before. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said. We're family. Titles don't matter. He turned to her then, calmly. They matter when money is involved. He nodded to someone seated near the door. A lawyer stood, introducing herself briefly, and began distributing documents. They moved from hand to hand. Pages turned softly. I watched my father's expression change as he read, the lines around his mouth deepening. My mother reached for his arm. He didn't pull away. The lawyer spoke clearly, outlining facts, not accusations, dates, signatures, responsibilities. The words were neutral, almost kind. There was no language of blame, only consequence. When she finished, the investor looked around the table. Effective immediately, he said, operational authority will be recognized publicly and contractually as it has existed privately. He paused, allowing the statement to settle. My sister opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. For the first time, she looked uncertain of the room. I felt no urge to speak. The investor turned to me then, not for defense, but for confirmation. Is this accurate? He asked. It is, I said. 2 words. Enough. The meeting concluded shortly after. There were procedural steps to follow, votes to be recorded, but the essential shift had already occurred. People gathered their belongings with care, avoiding unnecessary eye contact. Conversations resumed in low tones. Altered. My parents approached me as others left. My father spoke first. Why didn't you tell us? I considered the question. You were present, I said. You applauded. He looked down at the documents in his hands, then back at me. There was something like regret there, but it had arrived too late to be useful. My mother tried to smile. We just didn't know, she said softly. I know, I replied. My sister stood a few steps away, alone now. Her confidence collapsed inward. She didn't approach. She didn't apologize. She watched, as if seeing me clearly for the first time, and realizing how little she had understood. I gathered my things and left. Outside, the river moved steadily, indifferent to outcomes. I stood for a moment, breathing in the cool air, feeling something loosen in my chest. Not triumph, not relief, but release. In the days that followed, the changes became visible. Press releases corrected language. Titles were updated. Meetings were rerouted through my office. The business continued, quieter now, more accurate. My sister remained involved, but the spotlight no longer belonged solely to her. She adapted, as she always had, but the ease was gone. My parents called less often. When they did, the conversations were careful, polite. They asked about logistics, not feelings. I answered in kind. We were learning a new shape of relationship, one without assumptions. One evening, I returned to the apartment and sat at the same table where it had all begun. The city hummed outside. I opened the drawer and removed the handwritten note once more. I trust you. I folded it and placed it back. Trust, I had learned, did not require recognition. It required record. I did not feel the need to reclaim what had been taken. The structure had already done that. Justice had arrived without spectacle, delivered by those whose role it was to care about truth. I turned off the light and sat in the quiet, aware of my own breathing, aware of the calm that followed. The story, at last, was whole. The weeks after the shareholders' meeting did not explode into drama. They narrowed instead. Things that once felt crowded, opinions, expectations, demands, began to fall away. My calendar grew cleaner. Conversations became shorter. People spoke to me with preparation now, not assumption. The company adjusted quickly. It always had. Systems respond well to clarity. Meetings followed structure. Decisions moved through proper channels. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. Authority, when finally aligned with responsibility, has a calming effect. My sister adapted on the surface. She attended meetings. She contributed ideas. She nodded at the right moments. But something essential had shifted. She no longer spoke over others. She waited. Sometimes she hesitated, as if listening for permission that no longer came from the room. We did not discuss the wedding. We did not discuss the meeting. When our paths crossed, our exchanges were efficient. Morning, nothing more. At first, I wondered if an apology would arrive later, once the shock faded. Then I realized that an apology would require her to accept that the story she had told herself for years was incomplete. Some people protect their narratives the way others protect assets. They would rather lose ground than revise the map. I understood that impulse more than I expected. My parents invited me to dinner a month later. Not a celebration, not a reconciliation, just dinner. Their house looked the same. Furniture unmoved. Photos unchanged. In the hallway, a framed picture from the wedding still hung. My sister mid-laugh. glass raised. I was not in the frame. I had been standing behind the photographer. We sat at the table, where I had once done homework, once signed my first loan agreement, once listened quietly, while decisions were made without me. My mother served carefully, watching my face for signals I didn't give. My father cleared his throat more than necessary. Conversation stayed neutral, weather, traffic, distant relatives. Eventually, my mother spoke. "We didn't know how much you were carrying," she said. It wasn't an apology. It was an explanation. I nodded once. "You didn't ask." Silence followed. Not hostile. Just accurate. My father looked at his hands. "We assumed you were fine with it," he said. "You never complained." "I wasn't asked to," I replied. That was as close as we came to resolution. When I left, my mother hugged me longer than usual. I accepted it without leaning in. Boundaries don't require punishment. They require consistency. Outside, the evening air felt lighter than I remembered. At work, the investor stopped by my office one afternoon. He stood near the window, hands in his pockets, watching the city. "You handled it well," he said. "I handled it correctly," I replied. He smiled slightly. "That too." He didn't stay long. People like him rarely do. As he left, I considered how little of the outcome had required my voice. The truth had existed long before it was spoken aloud. All that was necessary was space and timing. I took a day off the following week, not to rest, but to walk. I moved through parts of the city I had avoided during the busiest years. Bookstores, cafes, a park bench overlooking water that didn't rush. I noticed how my thoughts no longer rehearsed conversations that would never happen. The internal noise had softened. In the quiet, something unexpected surfaced. Grief. Not for the business, not even for the betrayal. For the version of family I had worked to maintain, believing that contribution would eventually earn balance. For the years spent translating loyalty into labor, hoping it would be recognized without explanation. I sat with that feeling without correcting it. Grief doesn't need solutions. It needs acknowledgement. That evening, my sister sent a message. It was short. "We should talk sometime." I read it once, then again. I didn't respond immediately. When I did, hours later, my reply was measured. "If there's something specific, let me know." There was no follow-up. I understood then that the conversation she wanted would not be about facts. It would be about restoring comfort. About returning to a version of us where imbalance went unnamed. I chose not to reopen that door. Over time, the distance settled into a shape that felt intentional. We attended the same events occasionally. Holidays were navigated with politeness. My sister remained successful. My parents remained proud. I remained present, but no longer absorbent. At work, I hired people who valued structure. I delegated carefully. I stopped filling gaps that others refused to see. The company grew slower, but stronger. Growth without distortion lasts longer. One afternoon, while reviewing contracts, I found myself smiling at nothing in particular. Not happiness. Alignment. Later that night, I returned home and stood by the window, where I had sat after the wedding. The city looked the same, but I did not. The pressure that had once lived behind my ribs was gone. I thought of the toast, the applause, the way the room had accepted a story because it was told confidently. I understood now that silence is not weakness, but storage. It holds truth until the right moment arrives. I turned off the light and let the apartment settle around me. There was nothing left to prove. Only a life to continue quietly, deliberately, on terms that finally reflected the work that had always been done. The story didn't end with applause. That's the part people expect, the visible moment, the reaction shot, the satisfaction of being proven right. But real endings rarely announce themselves. They settle. They stay. Months passed. The company stabilized into something quieter than ambition, and stronger than reputation. We stopped chasing headlines. We stopped framing success as speed. Revenue became predictable. Staff turnover slowed. Investors stopped asking performative questions and started trusting reports. Trust, once restored to its proper place, reduced the noise. My role was no longer questioned. It didn't need to be defended. Authority, when exercised without urgency, becomes background infrastructure. People rely on it without noticing it's there. That suited me. My sister and I existed in parallel now. We attended the same meetings, sat across the same tables, shared the same last name, without sharing narrative space. She no longer spoke for the company without preparation. She asked before deciding. Not because she feared me, but because the system no longer bent around her. She was learning a different version of strength. So was I. Our parents adjusted slowly. They invited me to fewer conversations framed as family matters. They stopped asking me to smooth things over. They began to treat my time as something that belonged to me, not the family by default. One evening, my father called unexpectedly. I reread the documents. He said, "I didn't understand them before." "I know," I replied. There was a pause. Then, quietly, "You carried more than we saw." It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement. And sometimes, acknowledgement is the most honest thing people can offer. I didn't press him further. Pressure had never produced clarity in our family. Distance had. As winter arrived, the wedding season photos faded from social feeds. The toast became a memory recounted less often than not at all. The story my sister had told lost its audience, not through correction, but through irrelevance. Truth doesn't need repetition once it's operational. I found myself sleeping better, not because I was vindicated, but because I was no longer anticipating collapse. I stopped preparing for emergencies that were never mine to manage. I stopped translating silence into responsibility. In the quiet, something else became visible: choice. One morning, I declined a lucrative expansion proposal. It would have doubled our footprint and halved our control. The investor agreed without argument. Years earlier, I would have accepted and compensated later. Now, I trusted my own sense of enough. Enough revenue, enough distance, enough clarity. That decision changed more than the balance sheet. I started spending evenings away from screens. I reconnected with people who knew me outside of utility. I read without extracting lessons. I listened to music without tying it to productivity. None of it was dramatic. It was simply mine. My sister reached out again in spring. This time, she was direct. I didn't think it mattered. She said, "The credit." "I know," I replied. There was a long pause. The kind that invites explanation. I didn't fill it. "When you didn't correct me," she continued, "I thought you agreed." "I understood," I said. She exhaled slowly. "I don't know how to fix it." I considered that. "You don't have to," I said finally. "You just have to stop repeating it." That was the conversation. No forgiveness ceremony. No emotional collapse. Just a boundary spoken plainly and left intact. After that, we spoke less but more honestly. At the end of the year, the company hosted a small internal gathering. No press, no speeches, just staff, shared food, and a few quiet acknowledgments. One employee thanked me for consistency, another for listening. I accepted both without deflection. When I stood to leave, the investor caught my eye and nodded once. Nothing else was required. That night, I walked home instead of driving. The city lights reflected off wet pavement. People moved past each other, carrying invisible histories. I realized how many stories unfold without witnesses and how few of them need them. At my apartment, I paused by the window one last time. The place where this story had shifted, not because I planned it, but because I waited. Waiting, I had learned, is not inaction. It is restraint aligned with certainty. I thought of the wedding ballroom, the applause, the confidence with which a false version of events had been delivered. And I understood something important, not about my sister, or my parents, or even myself, but about power. Power doesn't announce itself. It positions itself early and speaks last. I turned off the light. There was nothing left unresolved, not because everything had been repaired, but because everything had been placed where it belonged. I wasn't the hero of the story my family told. I was something quieter, the one who made sure the truth held. Long after the room stopped clapping,